Good morning, everybody, and welcome to TLC Live. I'm Andrea Gomez.
I'm Orlando Sanchez.
Did you miss me last week?
Yes.
A lot?
La Reina del Sur no estuvo aquí.
Well, I saw that you have an ambassador here at the studio.
The ambassador did a good job, but as I told him, he can never fill your shoes.
Absolutely. Well, my shoes is, very high heels. It's difficult to feel my high heels.
I'm having equipment failure here. I can't hear anything out of here. Okay, here we
Mark,
go.
yeah. Okay.
Okay.
No?
You got to get me some new.
Again?
See, we wear these little things so we can hear.
This is the third time I buy a new one for
massive
him.
equipment failure.
What do you do with that? You're supposed to just, plug it in every Wednesday and that's it.
Yeah,
Do you
plug
do
it in.
something else with that?
No, I don't.
And other days? I don't understand.
No, I don't do anything with it.
Well, this week is back to school for the Houston Independent School District.
And many school districts.
And many school districts that started like last week and the week before. I took my kids to college.
Yes, you took your kids and then you harassed them the following weekend by showing up.
Yeah, I'm an empty nester, and I just so sad that after a week that I'm dropping off my son in Texas A&M, I went a week later, and I thought he was gonna be super happy seeing mommy,
I told you.
and he wasn't.
Nope. You probably embarrassed the hell out of him. His mommy shows up the first weekend that he's on campus. How embarrassing.
No, not only that, I saw it with my parents. So grandparents and mommy cleaning his room. Imagine all his friends and the roommate. Oh my God. I said, well, Harry, I'll see you next year. I'm not going to do it again. So please, parents.
He was probably going like
Please,
this,
parents,
yeah.
if you guys are having, kids first time in college, don't do that what I did. Don't show up just unannounced. And he told me, Mom, I'm 18. Just a little bit of better communication.
Yeah. So, politics, a couple of things. I've thought it interesting that they have set a trial date for former President Trump in 6 weeks. It took the apparently highly incompetent district attorney in Fulton County, Georgia, 4 years to develop a case against Donald Trump and dozens of his cohorts. And she wants to give him little over a month to prepare for a trial. That's just fascinating to me. And I mean, if people don't think the Democrat machine is after Republicans by weaponizing district attorneys and attorney generals in the United States, just look at the basic unfairness of that. That, you indict a guy and then you say, okay, get ready for trial in 6 weeks. Are you kidding me?
This is history in this country.
Yeah.
This is history.
The other piece of news is, of course, I saw a mailer an email by the Harris County Democratic Party saying that, this is how they get people that are dependent on government handouts. Of course, Social Security is not a government handout. We pay into Social Security by paying taxes most of our working life, and then we get benefits. But Andrea, in the 1930s, when they started Social Security, people's life expectancy in the United States was probably 67, 68, 69.
The most.
People lived to 90. Mm-hmm. Here we are in 2021. People are living into their 80s and 90s.
And even 100s.
Yeah, we have research now that deals with diseases. People's potentially fatal diseases are being cured. And so people are living 30, 35, maybe 40 years after retirement age. We cannot sustain that. Social Security was never meant to take care of you for 1/3 of your life. It was to help you in your golden years by giving you a stream of income for the 4, 5, 6, 7, maybe 10 years that you were alive. But again, life expectancy has grown substantially. And so anytime there's any talk about making sure that they're not entitlements because we paid to them. So these benefit programs, if they're adjusted, and what they're saying is we need to raise the retirement age for young people that haven't started contributing because their life expectancy is long. If we don't do that, Social Security is going to go broke. Mm-hmm. The United States is going to go broke. Remind you that we have $32 trillion worth of debt that we owe. That does not include the entitlements that are already programmed into the program. So, we've got to deal with this as reasonable citizens and taxpayers, and not listen to the alarms that are going off inside of Washington D.C. by one party or the other. So those are my two comments about today's political environment.
Those are the news on politics. But also, talking about politics, I mean, everything has to do with politics.
Yep.
Education, economy, everything has to do with politics. So this is the week of back to school for the HISD, but also the first time that the new board members from the Texas Education Agency, it's also taking care, or, took over of the HISD. I want you to explain the background, how did everything started in 2018, December 28th, with the press conference that you were the main character. As always, you're the main character.
So many years ago, an African American state legislator from Houston wrote a bill that says if schools continued to fail, not perform, that the Texas Education Agency could take over that school district and manage the school district until it's put back on course. Harold Dutton was the state representative. I think at the time, and I haven't done the research, but I think that Sylvester Turner was a member of the Texas legislature. I don't know how he voted on the bill, but my assumption is he voted in favor of it. So fast forward several years later, HISD continued to have failing schools, among them Phyllis Wheatley School, which is a storied African-American school that produced people like Barbara Jordan and many others. Those schools were failing their communities. So 2018, I, and Andrea was with me and several other folks, held a press conference across the street from the Hattie Mae Administration Building, demanding that the governor, once and for all, send in the Texas Education Agency to take command and control of the Houston Independent School District. Why? Among other things, not only were they failing students, parents, and the future of Texas, but several board members had been indicted in federal cases for racketeering and stealing money, and it just became an intractable problem. A week later, the governor announces that he's going to send the TEA in to take over HISD. The education bureaucracy, the education unions filed lawsuits in the state district court. It went to the Court of Appeals and ultimately to the Texas Supreme Court. The Supreme Court says it's valid legislation. TEA can, in fact, take over the Houston Independent School District. And then the TEA moved in with Mr. Miles.
So that happened 2018. Then a week later, which was at the beginning of 2019, is when Governor Greg Abbott announced. But then fast forward, it was, happened a couple of years. And it just happened this year, 2023, when finally the Texas Education Agency took over. And that was after it finished the school year in May. And then during the summer, it was a transition. And now this week is the first week that HISD is having the new board members by the TEA.
Correct.
So, saying that, we invited today as our guest to talk about this topic in TLC Live, Dr. Ana Lisa Gonzalez. She serves as a dean at the University of St. Thomas, and I want to thank University of St. Thomas and Sandra Solis for always helping us, bringing us these professors that they're fantastic, helping us to understand many topics. So, Dr. Professor, thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
So, let's help people understand the impact of this situation that TEA taking over HISD for the first time this year, after in 2019 Governor Abbott announced that was going to happen.
Well, this is extremely impactful. TEA dictates a lot of what happens infrastructurally, obviously curricularly, across the state of Texas. And so the impact that it's having is going to be very far reaching. We're looking beyond just demographics. We're now looking at psychographics also, and the effect that it's going to have on the constituents in HISD, not just the students, but faculty, members, teachers, professional educators, from the top down. So it's going to be quite impactful.
When you say impactful, what do you mean?
There's going to be a number of changes that are going to have to happen, but a lot that aren't perhaps planned for because of how grandiose the Houston Independent School District is and all of the different moving parts. There's going to be a lot of change that happens particular to professional educators and the roles that they play, teachers and the roles that they play, and curriculum that is dictated to them that then also impacts students. And again, if we're looking at demographics and psychographics, we're not just contending with ethnicity or those that have a different language that is their first language. We're looking at culture, subcultures of cultures. And if we're not being really planful, there can be an effect that is not being planned for and not being necessarily thought of, so that we're going to lose time. Instructional time is extremely precious, and it should be planned thoughtfully, and it should be planned in a differentiated way so that students are getting an equitable education, what they need, not necessarily equal, but what it is they need to be successful. And psychographics and demographics literally lead the way for that. So I'm hoping that they've been very planful for the impact that they're going to make on all students.
I have in your bio that you were at some point a teacher and assistant principal in Houston ISD. So I wanted you give us the insight on that. Like, what year was that? What was your experience back then in HISD, and how things have been changed?
Absolutely. So, late 90s is when I was a teacher. I was a special education teacher. I began as a life skills teacher and moved to resource. And I also did bilingual special education just because the school, the campus that I was on, catered to students that were definitely in need of not only remediation, but bilingual education also. I then became assistant principal there because I was pursuing my master's degree in educational leadership here at the University of St. Thomas at the time. So I was allowed to move into that position because I knew the campus very well. I knew the needs very well. And I'll tell you, a lot has indeed changed. That was the early 2000s, and that's when we saw No Child Left Behind being enacted. And at that time, I was still on an HISD campus, but I was also getting my doctorate at the University of Houston. So I was kind of playing a dual role at the time, and I saw a lot of change that was coming down the pipeline. There were things that I could do, academic freedom. I could cater to the needs of my students. Late 90s, early 2000s. But what we started to see is things like Project Clear at the time, where teachers were being told, here's your script, this is what you need to do. And so some of the changes that I wanted to make as an administrator weren't as easily being had because there was a lot of stipulations based upon accountability and high stakes testing and things of that sort. That's when we really took that turn. And because of that, it changed my trajectory to higher education. And it was because of the fact that I felt like my hands are being tied to the things I know I need to be doing. And so, again, now we work with professional educators here on campus. We train teachers, and we're seeing a lot of the same types of things happening. And the populations that need the most are sometimes getting the least. And so I'm very concerned about a cookie cutter type of approach that I've seen evolving over the years.
I'm a taxpayer in several counties in Texas and support three different school districts: Freestone Independent School District, Fairfield Independent School District between Houston and Dallas, Houston Independent School District, and Kinney and Brackett Independent School District in Kinney County. How come school districts like Fairfield Independent School District and Brackett Independent School District, who, by the way, their population is about 80% Hispanic, have such a great success rate, and how come urban school districts like Houston don't?
I think a lot of times it has to do with leadership. It really does. It has to do with what it is the leader, sorry, at the end of the day, what it is the leader is looking for, what it is they want the result to be. So I think a lot of times the leadership has been lacking in that they're representing things other than the students and the teachers with regard to the end results. So when we have really good leaders in place that are mindful of what it is that's necessary in the classroom to teach this diverse population, again, all demographics and psychographics considered, then we're allowed to execute the things that we know are correct. We can implement the programs that we recognize work for diverse populations. It really truly is about leadership, and that leader establishing an infrastructure that allows for teachers to teach based upon the needs of their students and allows administrators to manage as opposed to police, so that they, knowing that they recognize the population that their school serves, and they adjust accordingly. They're flexible. They still have that end result in mind. We want all, for example, fourth graders to definitely meet those standards that are dictated by TEA, but we want to have some leeway as to how that happens, recognizing the population that we're serving. And I think a lot of times that gets muddied when the leadership is not necessarily in place where it should be.
So, if I hear you correctly, then the problem lies with the leadership of the Houston Independent School District as opposed to other school districts that are diverse, because Fairfield Independent School District is heavily African American, and a lot of Hispanics are moving into the area, working in rural farms and ranches. Kinney County has a large Hispanic population along with the Anglo population. So, what I'm hearing you say is that the leadership in Houston was not up to par.
I'm feeling like the leadership, they were heading in different directions, and when multiple perspectives are great, correct, but shared vision and shared mission is absolutely necessary, or else you have different facets doing things that they think is best for the populations that they're serving. But if we're not doing it collectively, then we're going to see that some, because of the structure of HISD, we're going to see that some of the regional districts are getting exactly what it is they need while others are not. I think it's just important to have that leader recognize exactly what's necessary in that particular region and do whatever it is necessary, resources, materials, staffing, faculty, to ensure that the students in that particular district or region of the district are being properly served based upon their needs. And I think too, one of the things about it also is, my daughters have attended a private school, Montessori, for their K through 12 experiences. And the population on this campus is extremely diverse. And nonetheless, it works. So there's a structure. And when you have a plan and an approach, you can serve the masses beautifully according to their particular needs.
You know, one of the things I've noticed, I've served in the U.S. military, which is a massive operation, right? Whether it's the Marine Corps, the Navy, the Air Force, any of them. Or you take corporations that are massive corporations like ExxonMobil. They all have policies and procedures. In other words, they set out the goals of the company, and then they have policies within their divisions that everyone should subscribe to and be familiar with. Otherwise, it would be helter-skelter. So the Houston Independent School District is so massive, I think it's the third, fourth largest district in the United States, that it has to have policies and procedures in place. Otherwise, it's just mayhem, right? I mean, we had campuses that were failing, students were failing. We had a disproportionate dropout rate among Hispanics in Houston, and nobody was really paying attention. So, I mean, having policies and procedures dictated by either the CEO of the corporation, the Joint Chiefs of Staff of the military, or the head of the TEA, the State Board of Education, is not necessarily a bad thing, correct?
Absolutely not. Policies, procedures, standards, absolutely, we should all be aligned with, because again, at the end of the day, we want students to reach certain standards and optimize their potential. Policies, regulations, standards, should indeed dictate what it is that we do to make sure that students are successful. Now, we also have to remember that we're working with human beings. And because they're human beings, they bring individual differences that we have to consider, even from outside of the classroom. So that leader has to recognize those things, align with standards and policies, most definitely, or else you're exactly correct. It would be mayhem. But you also have to take in consideration those non educational and educational factors and make sure that that is in alignment as well. When we have populations that are failing, it's a phenomena. Is it that Hispanic, for example, in special education, we have a high representation of Hispanic males? Is it that Hispanic males don't learn as well as others, or are the ones that are born with these disabilities? It's a phenomena. We have to delve in deeper, seeing what we're doing that is causing this phenomena. There's something that we're contributing. We're not considering certain things, perhaps, because it can't be true that this population is just predisposed to specific learning disabilities and things of that sort. So we have to take that human element also. Definitely alignment with policies and standards, but also considering those individual differences of the population that we're serving and the needs of the teachers based upon those independent differences.
Dr. Gonzalez, it got my attention that you were saying that in the 90s, when you were working for HIZ, you started seeing that the district was giving the teachers scripted. And trying to, I don't understand what was the purpose. But then later, we're seeing what is going on right now, and many teachers are complaining that they're being told what to say, what to do, and also, like, some of the parents said, like, my kids are being brainwashed in the school. So tell me, how did that started? Why, and what do you think it was the purpose of that, and how do we got to this point?
Well, I believe a lot of it had to do, there's work out of Stanford University, Linda Darling Hammond, and when I worked at Rice University, Linda McNeil, they did a lot of research actually here in HISD. And one of the things that they talked about was a test prep curriculum, because these students have to pass this test. At the time, it was TOS, then TAX, then STAR. And because of that, Project Clear came in and a few other programs, and we're scripting what it is we need to teach, because these are the things that our students will see on those standardized tests, and those high stakes were posted. So if my students are not passing that test, I'm being blamed for it, number one, which we can look at that in several different ways. But the idea is, the district was saying, okay, we're going to tell you exactly what you need to say and exactly what you need to do, so that we can pour this information into the student's brain so that when they take that test, they pass. It's high stakes. There's accountability that's married to that. And because of that, we saw the test prep curriculum, the birth of the test prep curriculum, where a lot of these students were getting surface level types of instruction as opposed to critical thinking and higher order processing. That's what comes with scripting, because just for example, if I'm a fourth grader, but I read on a first grade level and you hand me fourth grade materials, there's not a whole lot I'm going to get from those unless my teacher is allowed to differentiate. She or he is allowed to supplement that. And so that cookie cutter scripted approach really wasn't working because of the diversity that exists in our school districts.
And I wanted you to explain also to our viewers and many parents that they don't understand why teachers and the school districts are preparing these kids for these standards test, because they're getting money from the government, on funding from the government, depends on the scores of these tests. And that's why it's so important that they emphasize all year long, like, working for the kids to pass these tests.
Yeah, and it's the high stakes and accountability that was married back in the early 2000s that really started to cause the issues with the test prep curriculum. And when I think about being a teacher and I think about teacher education, and that's what we do, that's our business here in the School of Education and Human Services, one of the things we talk about is navigating that system, because you are indeed held accountable for those students' scores. Should those students be passing those tests? Absolutely. But the best way for them to do that is to provide them with a very rich curriculum, a lot of critical thinking types of activities, a lot of depth, interactions, and things of that sort. Differentiation and supplement uh, based upon their particular needs, the perhaps reading levels or math levels, whatever it is that they need to be able to close that gap. And what was happening is that if your students are not passing, again, funding is the big issue, obviously, but it also has to do with your position as a teacher. We saw back then that a lot of teachers that were in testing grade levels, because it's third grade and beyond for the STAR, fourth grade teachers being demoted to first grade because their students didn't pass the test. And it was not because they weren't doing their job a lot of times. Again, there's always one bad apple in the whole 9 yards, but a lot of times when you're being dictated to and you're given a classroom of students that have holes in their skills and gaps in their knowledge, there's things that you have to do to bring them up to that level. But a test prep curriculum is not going to do that. And so I'm demoted, though I'm going out of my way and doing and going above and beyond to be able to meet the needs of my students. But it's not being recognized because they didn't pass a test.
What role did teachers' union play in all this? In other words, though we hear a lot about that the union was protecting bad teachers. The union would admit they have no bad teachers. How do you assess that? What do you tell the public? And the reason I bring that is because unions, I'm not opposed to unions. I think unions play a role in protecting workers and ensuring their safety and garnering benefits for them, negotiating contracts. But protecting the bad is not something that's beneficial. And I'll give you an example in the corporate world. Back in the 70s and through the late 60s, you saw the unions essentially were part of the problem that brought down the automobile industry in the United States, both Ford and Chrysler and General Motors, because they were manufacturing cars that had what we call legacy costs built into those cars. So they were selling a car for $20,000. It wasn't competing in terms of quality, and in comes a Japanese Corolla made by Toyota, and they were selling them for $8,000, and they were running 300,000 miles. And so here we got a better quality automobile. The auto industry went down the tubes in the United States. The stocks went, many of them filed bankruptcy. The U.S. government has to step in and save Chrysler. Ford went through its problems, General Motors. So what role does the unions play in this problem with public education?
Absolutely. So I know that the unions in the Northeast, they really have a lot more leverage than those do here in Texas, but they play a very key role because you're exactly right. They could definitely support the good, but they can also support the bad. And so again, this for me has a lot to do with vision and again what it is we're trying to accomplish and keeping that in the back of our minds, in the front of our minds, in all the decisions that we make. Again, leadership is really key. What exactly, it's kind of the idea in teaching, we call it backward design. What do we want the end result to be? What exactly we want for our teachers in the school systems, our professional educators, that needs to be something that we consider in every single decision that we make with regard to unions. That needs to be something that's taken into consideration, not just that, obviously, students, but also taking into consideration the needs that teachers have and professional educators have, and how their needs are so far reaching that they affect all students, number one, but that we keep our eyes on that prize. There's so many different influences particular to unions and the larger, grander scheme of things, that we sometimes can get caught up in, okay, what is it that can happen for us? How can we elevate ourselves? But we really need to make sure that we continually keep our eye on that prize, because they do indeed influence what's happening in those school districts. And a lot of times when we're protecting teachers for the sake of protecting teachers, as opposed to excellent teachers that are doing whatever it is that they need to do, then we probably need to realign, and we need to look at our vision and our mission and really shift according to the needs of the school districts and the educators that serve those school districts. So again, it goes back to that idea of leadership and keeping in line with what our strategic vision is, so that we can help all students and all teachers to maximize their potential.
So now let's go back to the TEA now, because you were saying, I mean, hopefully, and that's what we everybody hope that they come with a good plan to change everything. Anyway, it will be a process for that, and we're not gonna know the real results till probably a year or 2 years. 2016, the law changed, so now TEA not only can take over for 2 years, but now it's more time, indefinitely, whatever they consider it, they need to take the time. So we're not gonna see the real results if this taking over was the best approach or the best solution of the problem. We're not gonna know everything. We just hope.
Absolutely. And here's my hope. Because of how large HISD, I mean, this is a massive undertaking. And again, being extremely planful with some distal and proximal goals with timelines and sequences is extremely important, because as I mentioned earlier, instructional time is precious. The time that teachers have with children in a classroom is absolutely precious. So we need to spend it accordingly, and recognize the magnitude of that. And when I say that to say, I hope that the distal and proximal plans that they've set are representing the changes that they need to make, but doing so in a very strategic way, so as to not infringe upon instructional time, to not infringe upon the needs of the students. It's a huge undertaking. And what happened this summer, I know there, just knowing several people and having a lot of colleagues in HISD, there's still some things that they're working out, and they will be working those things out. But I'm hoping that those distal and proximal goals will help to ensure that students are not losing time. Students are not falling into the gaps that, for example, with the pandemic, we're having students that were online for a year. We have to contend with what that really means to the learning process for all of these students. And so the same type of thing, as these changes are happening, I'm hoping that they're accounting for instructional time that may be lost, shifting in positions of faculty members and staff and administrators, and the effect that that has on a campus. I'm hoping that they've worked in some kind of processes and procedures to ease the effect that that could possibly have on students' learning in the classroom.
And now, as I always say, call to action. What we can tell, because now it's also a very important role, the parents in this. It's not only TEA, it's not only the teachers and the administrators and the students, but also the parents in this process.
Absolutely. And I think back to PL 94-142, that was the law that brought forth individual education plans for special education students. That was driven by parents. So parents need to be informed. They need to hear, they need to ask questions, most definitely, because a lot of times doors are closed and we're dictated to as parents. Also, here's what your student needs to be doing. This is what your child needs to be doing at home. And it's okay to question those types of things, to say, why exactly is my child doing this? What exactly are you doing for my child in the classroom? And when we're trying to fit into little cookie cutter places and pieces, a lot of that gets lost in the shuffle. So it's time to take action and have your voice heard, to recognize that my child has very particular individual needs, and teachers should be prepared and are prepared to be able to differentiate based upon those needs, but they need to be given the freedom to do that. They need the support to be able to do that. And things like advocating against high stakes testing. Of course, we all need to be held accountable. Absolutely. But high stakes testing is not necessarily the way. I often say, one of the things in some of my courses, the students will say, well, Dr. Gonzalez, what do you think should happen? I said, all of these test prep workbooks, all of these worksheets and things of that sort. Let's get rid of all of those things and let's invest in educators. Let's have instructional specialists on campus. Let's have STEM reading specialists, instructional coordinators that support our teachers so that they can support the students in the classroom. Period. End of sentence. No one's perfect. Everyone. It's the idea of Kaizen. Lifelong learners. We're always learning. We're always striving to do better, and that's what specialists are there for. That's what professional educators are there for, to support these teachers so they can support these students. So as parents, we definitely have to have our voices heard to be able to say, this is what we want on our campuses. This is what we're advocating for.
What role should, one of the arguments that I tend to make is that, public education, at least I'm an immigrant. I immigrated to Houston in 1962, did not speak a word of English. Started public school in 1965, I think, at Shern Elementary School at the intersection of Stella Link and 610. There was no bilingual education. Of course, I struggled with vocabulary and reading comprehension, but that was a result of being an immigrant whose parents didn't speak English. But I survived. I went on to college, graduated with honors, and, always did struggle with vocabulary. But again, that's a first generation immigrant. But education seemed to work. One of the observations I have is that the decline of public education in the United States is concomitant with the U.S. federal government sticking its nose into something that was designed to be strictly a state purview. Every state designed its own education system. In 1867, Andrew Jackson created a Department of Education, but it was for people for the gathering of just some statistics. Today, we have well over 5,000 employees and a budget in excess of $60 billion in the Department of Education, and it's gone down the tubes. Is there any correlation between the federal government's infiltration of public education, which, by the way, is nowhere found in the enumerated powers of the Constitution? In other words, the federal government has specific roles. Nowhere does it say anything about public education in the states. Is there a correlation?
Absolutely. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that, I always hate to say it, but traditionally teaching was a female dominated field, just always has been. And one of the things that I've always mentioned to my students is no one walks in to a surgery into an emergency room and tells the doctor, you need to do this and make sure you're doing that.
Well, let me correct you, Professor. Let me correct you. The federal government is in the physician's office. They're in the operating room and they're in the hospitals. The federal government is dictating our health care. But go ahead.
Absolutely. And I'm speaking particular to things like skills and what exactly, use your scalpel in this particular way versus I feel very free to be able to tell teachers what it is they need to do. I feel very free to be able to tell administrators in Texas and in Idaho and wherever there else might be. And I don't know the population that they serve well. I don't know what it's like to be a teacher. At home, we hear this all the time. Well, Jimmy, Susie, they don't do that at home. Well, you're not teaching them fractions. You're not teaching them algebra 2. You're not teaching them science. So it's going to be a little bit different. And I think a lot of times the government comes in from on high and tells us what it is we need to be doing in the classroom and has no idea what best pedagogical practices are. They don't recognize the non-educational factors and needs that our students have and the populations that we have. I mean, I think about looking at just in HISD, considering the west side of town versus the east side of towns, there's different needs. And yet we're being dictated to from on high what it is we need to be doing in those classrooms via scripts and things of that sort, lesson plans that have already been filled in. That was unheard of in the late 90s when I was a teacher. And that's the thing. I think the government just, let's definitely have standards and policies. Absolutely. But let's allow not just our state, but our districts to really be mindful of how they're enacting those policies and standards based upon the needs of that particular group of students. And
That's
again, it can vary from 10 miles this way to 10 miles that way. Things look very differently.
Absolutely.
Now let me ask you, because I read your biography. Obviously, you're teaching at a Catholic university. Catholics believe that, at least in parochial education, that a good moral training in the Catholic tradition is an important part of an education. Now, obviously, because the separation of church and state, we don't have an official religion in the United States. So a public school can't teach Catholicism. They can't teach Judaism. They can't promote, the Muslim Quran. But is there a role for civics and moral education in public education, which I think most Americans, if you polled them, would believe is devoid of the curriculum today? In other words, when I grew up, we feared our coach. We feared our principal. I can't tell you how many times I got whacked in the rear end and slapped by my Catholic nun principal because while some may or may not agree on corporal punishment, there was a structure of discipline which seems to be devoid in public schools now. It seems like students run the operation. There's just no sense of discipline. How do we inculcate values upon the masses without getting into the religious realm?
Absolutely. And I think it's a major part of teacher education. It's something that should be included. We obviously, at the University of St. Thomas, we follow a Catholic anthropology. We believe in the dignity of the human person. We believe in helping students to maximize their potential, mind, heart, and hand. And that's something that we dictate. We definitely, Catholic social teaching, it's something that we discuss, and it's something that we speak to with regard to the application of mind, heart, and hand, and Catholicity, and what that really means. So in the classroom, I can't necessarily say, let's say a prayer. I can't necessarily refer to anything that's Catholic rooted, but I can model exactly what it is to respect the dignity of the human person and give students what it is that they need to be successful. Recognizing that, again, they have the right to an education, and not just any education, a great education that is suited to their needs and their differences. And that's Catholic anthropology in and of itself. Can we say it? No, not necessarily, but we definitely teach it. And we teach it like we're teaching anything else. And I think that's the issue. A lot of teacher education programs perhaps cover some theory with regard to moral reasoning and things of that sort, but we don't really talk about what that looks like in your teaching. How do you plan for that when you're lesson planning? What exactly are you going to do to make sure that you're helping to develop that mind, heart, and hand? So I'm a thinker, but I'm doing so with love in my heart so that my hand is reflective of that. What I'm doing is applied. And that's something that we take very seriously here at the University of St. Thomas. And we equip our teachers, Catholic or not, with the ideals of respecting Catholic social teaching. And this is why we do things like differentiate. This is why we go above and beyond as teachers, because we are preserving that dignity of that human person, recognizing that they need more. And if it's moral reasoning that sometimes they get at home, sometimes they don't, it's part of what we do. We show them how to be a kind-hearted individual that is respectful of other human beings.
Let me I love the conversation just because I try to get to the root of the problem. Social media, when it was invented, was originally designed to connect the world, right? To make us more connected, interconnected, to understand other cultures, understand other languages, understand other traditions, other nationalities, have a little respect for everyone. But as I see it, it has really torn the fabric of society. And as I look at mass shootings, and particularly school shootings, it's concomitant with the rise of activism in social media. And, you see all that. And not only is it social media, but we've got to recognize, and parents have to recognize, and I'm wondering if education recognizes that there are external forces out in that do not like the United States. Let's not be Pollyannish here, okay? The Russians, the Chinese, the Middle Eastern countries that hate us are infiltrating our social media and trying to create hate among Americans, right? One group versus another group versus racial groups versus transgendered versus gay, women versus men, Hispanic immigrants, illegal aliens, they just want to tear us apart. And it seems to me like these fringe groups, these hate groups, which do exist because we see that all the time, whether it's a Walmart shooting, a church shooting of African Americans, or going into a Dollar General store in Florida and taking your vengeance out on African Americans, which are our fellow citizens. All of that is driven by hate. But that hate is driven by fear, and the fear is inculcated by a lack of education and socialization and understanding our culture. Would you agree with that? That social media has really ramped up this anxiety and controversy among our society?
Absolutely. I think you're exactly correct. The social media, yes, let's globalization. Let's be able to learn about other cultures, even though they're thousands of miles away. And it has had the opposite effect. I think that idea of hate, not just hate of other groups, but hate of yourself, because I'm trying to match up to this irreality that I see in this snippet
Precisely.
on a
Precisely.
TikTok or whatever it may be. You don't see the reality that that person's living in. It looks so glamorous. And how do I keep up with that irreality? Stereotypes, and not truly interacting with individuals the way that I should, receptive and expressive skills and things of that sort. That doesn't happen via social media. It's coming at you. It's very receptive, but what do I bring to it? And when I'm receiving all of these messages that are extremely stereotypical, that are just laden with hate, absolutely it's going to have influence on how I grow. We always say racists are not born, they're socialized.
I
You're
agree
not
with that.
born inherently racist. You hear things, you see things, and you're socialized. And so when we look at social media, we're desensitized to so many different things. And these are our children. I mean, I was mindful of what my children watched on TV years ago when they were younger. And now with social media, it's 10 times, tenfold what it is that you need to be mindful of, because we have these kids that are babysit by TikTok and all these social media types of things. And no one's interpreting things for them. No one's telling them this is not reality. No one's
Yeah.
telling them this is not what all individuals are like. And that, it's like any other propaganda. It's being fed to them by the spoonful. And in one of our classes, our digital instructional strategies course, that's one of the things we talk about is how to use technology, how to teach children to use technology for things other than social media,
Yeah.
how to detect when things are a little bit off, what we can and can't believe that we see on the internet. Because it's necessary. It's a whole other thing where we will lock our doors, but do we turn off our social media accounts at night to protect
No.
our children?
Yeah, and I'll tell you what's even more frightening is that with artificial intelligence and all of these social media companies, and I don't want to pick on one, but I'm just going to use one as an example, Meta and Facebook, they're gathering so much data on our children that by the time they're adults, they can virtually predict a human being's next step, next decision, next thought, next executed action. And it's amazing to me that our legislators are allowing this, that they're preying upon and gathering data and building these massive models based on millions of data points that we transact every day, that no one has tried to control that. Not that we're for government control, but when corporations run amok, as social media has, I think it's time to step in. That society says through our representative, there have to be some parameters. I mean, do you agree or disagree with that?
I totally agree with that. There definitely has to be parameters. Look at the effect that it's having on our children. These children are our future. They're the next generation that's going to be running this country, and it absolutely. We have to take the reins. We have to be advocates for our children. We have to recognize that when it's so funny because I'm not on necessarily on a lot of social media or things of that sort. My daughter said, "Mom, we want to create this account for you so you can see what Aunt Sonia's doing and what all my nieces are doing." And we have a French bulldog, and I clicked on something, and all of a sudden, that's all I was getting. And I said,
Mhm.
"How on earth is it that they know so much about what we're doing?" Well,
Yeah.
algorithms. How is that safe? How is that safe? It is as if they are in our homes walking in and taking note of everything that our children are doing, everything that we're doing. It's extremely scary.
Yeah.
And they want to pull the reins and tell us what to do in education, but Facebook is just allowed to run it exactly
Oh
the way
yeah.
that they want to. AI, it's the new thing and it's great. Is it? It's scary. It's
Right.
extremely scary. And I think you're right, Orlando, the idea of we need to advocate. We need to let our representatives know that this is something that we're extremely concerned about.
Yeah, I know the pressures of social media. I follow Andrea on Facebook, and I'm just depressed every time. I mean, just I can't keep up, but I just get depressed.
Whatever. Uh, Dr. Gonzalez, you've been amazing. Thank you so much
Thank you.
for all your information, for the knowledge, and for help us to understand the situation, especially you being in the early in late or early 90s in HISD, and now understand what is going on years later or
She
decades
was in the
later.
battlefield,
Yeah.
take dodging incoming missiles. By the way, do you usted habla español?
Sí.
Okay,
Sí,
bueno.
nomás un poquito. Nomás un poquito.
Okay, all right.
No puedo practicar cada día y por eso no es tan formal como en el pasado.
Well, we have a good translator here, so she can help us.
Okay.
Professor, it's been wonderful. Thank you for your time. I know you're quite busy as the dean of the department, and we thank you for your time and hope to have you back sometime soon.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Thank
And
you so
thank you
much. I
for
appreciate it.
University of St. Thomas always helping us.
You are very welcome. Yes, we love you guys.
Take care.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Bye bye.
Bye bye. Wow. Wonderful.
Very knowledgeable, very dedicated, obviously very committed to not only her role as dean of the university, but looking out for the future of our country, which is the education of our children.
Absolutely. And I can,
Everybody's been worried about since that about 700 BC. Plato wrote about the education of children. Everybody's been worried about it, so
yeah. So
concerned.
this is a topic that we need to keep bringing it to TLC because definitely
Yeah.
it's very important.
Yep. All right. Well, thanks for tuning in. As you know, we are a volunteer driven organization. We rely on the generosity of Texans to keep us going. This is part of what we do as a weekly program to try to expand the knowledge base that you may have as a citizen of this state and of this great country and how to affect public policy changes. We want to make sure that our audience is informed. And so to do that, it's expensive. As you know, we have our Leadership Latino class, which was probably our largest class that we've had.
I know it was fantastic, and we're looking for another Leadership Latino class at the end of January next year, 2024. So please visit us on TexasLatinoConservatives.com. Here is a picture of our class back in August. At the beginning of August, it was 4th and 5th August. So that is a very, very large class, and I'm so proud of not only TLC, how we're being growing and develop the program with Leadership Latino, but the people that is being elected and the leaders.
Well, I was just going to say, Andrea, the president of the Katy Independent School District Board of Trustees, Mr. Perez, was endorsed by TLC. 3 members of the Board of Trustees of Katy Independent School Districts are graduates of Leadership Latino.
Yeah.
And so to some extent, we've played a minor role in structuring the public policy outcomes of the Katy Independent School District. We played a role in the Spring Branch and some of the school districts in Fort Bend, and now we're going to try to play a significant role, I think, in the Cy-Fair Public School Board of Trustees education coming up in November. So we're doing what we can to try to stabilize society, make sure that our children are receiving a good education, and that parents' voice are heard at the board level at schools across the state of Texas. So all of that requires money. Go to our website, texaslatinoconservatives.com. You will see at the top there's a donate button. Make sure you hit that, whether it's $5, $50, $500, or $50,000. We will gladly accept it and put it to good use. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you guys next week.
Muchas gracias. Nos vemos el próximo miércoles. Chao, chao.